Many children in South Africa go to bed hungry. This sad fact, again highlighted by a report on the child support grant, which suggests that it's not enough to stave off malnutrition. To discuss, we're joined by one of the authors of that report commissioned by the Department of Social Development. We're joined by UCT Children's Institute senior researcher Paula Proudlock. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Proudlock. Child poverty, we know it leads to stunting, learning difficulties, things that follow you throughout your life. Just give us a sense first of the scale of this horrible problem in South Africa right now.
Good evening, Francis. Our research found that the child food poverty rate was at 38% at the moment, which means we have nearly 8 million children who go to bed hungry. These 8 million children are living below the food poverty line, so their parents have less than 760 Rand per month to ensure that they are fed. And you can't feed a child on money, having less than 760 Rand per month for the child's food.
8 million, that's just staggering. So you look at then the child support grant, which is 500 Rand. So the parents get that for one child, and that has to feed everybody, all three of them. So essentially nobody gets enough. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, what's going on in South Africa is that because we don't provide any social assistance cover for unemployed adults, and we have such high unemployment rates at the moment, especially for women, where most children are living. They're living with women. Everybody is relying on the grants that are going into that household for children, the elderly and disabled. And the child support grant, if you think it's at 510 Rand, whereas your pension and your disability grants are 2,000 Rand, and your SRD for unemployed adults is 350 Rand. So if you're a mom, an unemployed mom with 2 children, you will be getting 510 Rand per child, and if you're lucky, you'll also get the 350 Rand. And so that family of 3 has to survive on that, which means all of the people in that house are living below the food poverty line.
The Social Development Department commissioned this report. The Minister, Lindiwe Zulu, says that she'll take it on board. Are you satisfied with that response?
Look, when we are commissioned to do research, it's the beginning of a process for the department. So now that they have the evidence, the ball is in their court to take that evidence further and to decide what they're going to do with it. We are hoping that the evidence is so compelling that it's very clear what needs to be done. And why it's also clear for us is that, this is South Africa's most successful child poverty reducing program. This has been proven over the last 2 decades. And nothing else that's on the table could achieve the alleviation of child poverty. This is the only program that is at the scale to achieve alleviation of poverty. And all that has to happen is a decision between the Minister of Social Development and the Minister of Finance to agree to increase it to the food poverty line. And that would immediately reduce that large number of children living below the food poverty line.
Look, these children rely on their parents receiving the grant and obviously feeding them, right? But would you say in most cases that is happening? The parents are using this widely. It's simply not stretching far enough.
Yes, most of the evidence over 20 years of research on this grant show that the majority of people who receive it spend it on food. The next thing that it's spent on is transport. And if you think of the high food inflation and fuel inflation that's been going on, particularly over the past 3 years, you can imagine how those grants have to stretch if they have to cover everyone's food and transport needs in the family.
All right, and we know so many are left out of the net. Would that include child-headed households? Is there a process to go and get this grant for those households?
Yes, there is a process, but we don't actually have very high numbers of child-headed households. What we find is that households are very fluid in South Africa, so you've seen a lot of movement of households. So you might have some children living alone for a while, but the adults are coming and going. Similarly, we have we have high numbers of children who aren't living with their parents and are living with relatives. That's at 4 million children. 4 million children are not living with their parents but with relatives.
Sure. Final question. I mean, why is this grant relatively so low compared to the other grants that you spoke about? Could you find a reason? Is this just the way it's played out? And have the numbers been crunched to tell Treasury this is what it would take to increase the number to the child poverty line? Because we know South Africa is saying itself it just can't afford anything right now.
Well, when the grant was introduced, the amount it was modeled on was how much it costs to provide food and clothes for a child. But over the 20 years of its existence, that purchasing power has been eroded by food inflation. And every year, the Minister of Finance announces an annual increase, and that annual increase is often based on headline inflation, which is lower than food inflation. But if this grant is intended to cover children's food, then we should be increasing it on an annual basis based on food inflation, and that hasn't been happening. So that's why its base amount has been eroded. So it is no longer fulfilling the rationale for which it was introduced in 1998. It doesn't cover food. And so we're asking that it be increased up to that food poverty line of 760 Rand so that it would at least cover food. And what we must also understand is that it doesn't ensure that the child will have nutritious food, because at 760 Rand, we're talking about enough food for energy, not enough food for good nutrition. So, already many households are having to rely on starch and on fast cooking food and having to skimp on fruit and vegetables and protein and oils, which is what children need to grow well.